Welcome to Graphic Policy Radio. This is your host, Ilana Levin. You may have heard that one of my closest friends and frequent collaborator, Steven Attewell, died earlier this month. He had been dealing with cancer for years, but he was only 40 and I'm still in shock. I've struggled with how to honor his work on the podcast and make sure that listeners know what's happening. We ended our most recent episode of the podcast talking about how we will be going to cover the next episodes of X-Men 97 and our plans for that. But I also want to let folks know the ways we are continuing to keep his work alive and his community active. I'm currently working to clean up the audio quality of some of the earliest episodes that we have recorded together from back in the early 2010s. I'll share more about that later in the episode. And I wanted to share with you some of the things we shared at his memorial. Beyond the dazzling array of union activists, renowned academics, comics nerds, and childhood family and friends who came together to memorialize him, there are also thousands of people who care about him because they love his books, his blogs, his podcasts, his activist work. It's been an honor that I've been able to relay your wonderful words of support from the online community to his family. I know they're meaningful for them. They were asking about printing out tweets and the like. His family is also suggesting people make donations to the Emergency Workplace Organizing Fund, which is an absolutely worthy cause, supporting direct worker-led union organizing. Stephen was a union organizer, rank and file. He came from a family of rabble-rousers and worker organizers. His great-grandfather, Humphrey Cooper Attewell, was a bootmaker, and he became a big organizer in the bootmakers union during World War I, ended up being one of the leaders in the 1926 national strike in the UK, and eventually was even elected to Parliament when Labour won big in 1945. Something that I learned at his memorial from his mother, Catherine Newman, that I don't know that I'd heard mentioned before, was that Stephen himself had done some research and digging into the earliest Attewell ancestors. That ancestor was Adam Attewell, who was hung for his role in the pivotal 1381 Peasants' Revolt in England. This was one of the most important mass protests of the Middle Ages. You know, this guy was hung for trying to bring down the king. Like, this is a real hero. And that is some kind of a legacy. When I spoke at Stephen's memorial, I mentioned how his interpretations of Captain America and comics in general have really brought history education to so many fans and have probably shaped how these characters are being written now. I also shared that he knows more about A Song of Ice and Fire than anyone in the continent, including George R.R. Martin himself. You know, there are people in fandoms whose critical work on a topic is so well known and respected that everyone in the fandom reads them and eagerly awaits their take on subjects. People defer to them for insight into the media that they love. That's one of the reasons, why we do this podcast. And I was a fan of Steven Attewell's writing before we met in person. I found his blog Race for the Iron Throne when I first began reading A Song of Ice and Fire myself and went out searching for what smart people on the left had to say about the series. I think we connected on Tumblr. And I'd seen that he just posted that he was moving to New York City after getting his doctorate in history, and I invited him to hang out. I was surprised when he said yes. I should not have been surprised. Because day after day, for decades, Stephen shared his insight about what he loved with others. Anyone could ask him a question on his Tumblr, and provided they were not an asshat, they would get a thoughtful answer, drawn from his knowledge of everything from history to politics to labor organizing, to a million pieces of speculative fiction and films he loved. He was endlessly generous with his time, and he was patient with everyone. It made sense that he was patient because he would have had to have been patient from the time he spent organizing his fellow academic workers at UC Santa Barbara. Any successful union organizer, and he was a successful union organizer, he helped organize the campus academic workers, any successful union organizer has to be able to not just talk to people, but listen to them as well. Organizers must understand workers' concerns, hear them, and explain to them why making the brave move of joining together with their coworkers is the thing that will make their lives better. Steve had that empathy, patience, and wisdom. I love that everyone addressed him as Maester Steven on Tumblr. That's Maester spelled Maester, which is an honorific that George R.R. Martin created for scholars and healers in his A Song of Ice and Fire series. That title was apt for Steven. He was a voice of wisdom in fandom, who was able to address complex realities with sensitivity. His non-fandom book is People Must Live My Work, Direct to Job Creation in America from FDR to Reagan. Worker justice was his mission. He brought class analysis and deep knowledge of economic systems to labor organizing, to everything from Star Wars to the Venture Brothers, like on our podcasts together. His series, A People's History of the Marvel Universe, was giant in its scale. He actually was working to see if he could bring it to print before he died, and it's a shame that we don't have that, but we do have it online and we'll maintain it. In A People's History to the Marvel Universe, he wove together real history and sprawling fictional worlds with great depth and an unprecedented mastery. Who else but Steven Attewell was going to write something like Cap saves Altamont, or Anti-Mutant Prejudice and the Mutant Rights in the Longue Durée, or, Cap meets Falcon in the Isle of Forbidden Love? When there were topics that he wanted to write that were outside of his immediate personal experience or expertise, he would go out of his way to make sure those perspectives and experiences were taken into account. As someone with graphic policy, website, if someone had come to me who was a non-Romani person, and they told me they wanted to write about how Romani characters were used as placeholders for Jewish identity in comics, I would have been worried that they might have said something offensive by accident. But Steven always did the homework and respected people and listened to their voices and got wisdom from them directly. And the result was something, like his essay, The Difficult Question of Jewish and Romani Representation, which has been well received by Jewish and Romani communities, and it's work that we all admire. Steven and I had been podcasting together for a decade with many episodes covering the X-Men and Captain America, as well as our whole series on the Venture Brothers. The Venture Brothers podcast was really his idea. He saw a lot of people who loved the show didn't have knowledge of history and pop culture to understand and appreciate the layers of meaning of the series. He felt fans deserved to enjoy the full richness of the show, and he wanted to help make that possible. And, he used this platform to share what he knew about history and pop culture, and I feel honored that I could periodically jump in with some thoughts about Duran Duran. One of my other fellow podcast hosts, Sarah Daniel Rasher, said something incredibly poignant about the last conversation that they'd had with Steven. They both were geeking out about that new cartoon, Has Been Hotel. Sarah said to me, and I quote, "He had so much more to discover and write and be excited about." And thank you for sharing that. And Sarah wrote a really good bit for him as well. Steven messaged me the day that X-Men 97 went live. He wanted to make sure I watched the show right away and suggested we make time to podcast about it right away. And I had thought about, waiting to just cover it at the end of the series. I wasn't feeling well. I've been so busy. And I'm so grateful that we were able to record it while we could. And it is breaking my heart that we will not be able to finish X-Men 97 together. I have not actually watched any of the episodes that have come out since he died. I will, but it's really hard. The show was bringing him so much joy. I'm also struck by the fact that we are now without Steven and without his vlogging partner, Scott Erik Kaufman. Scott was a professor of visual rhetoric, really brilliant. He was a guest on graphic policy on occasion too. I know he was definitely on to talk about Daredevil. And Scott and him had done a lot of episodes of podcasts and vlogs about A Song of Ice and Fire. They're still online on YouTube. You should go out and listen to them right away. Both died from cancer far too young. And they both were part of a generation of bloggers who were all about creating their own work on their own platform. They weren't depending on social media. They didn't spend time pitching the mainstream press. They just created their own platforms, and they were so brilliant that people found them and appreciated them there. And it really feels like it's sort of an end of an era to have them both be gone now. And I know that we will work to protect their intellectual legacy. When I learned from Steven's brother that it was looking like he would not have much more time with us, I thought about what is the biggest outlet I could pitch to have his obituary, because Steven is brilliant and everyone deserves to know about his work and how important it was. And I began trying to think about outlets and Christ, there's almost nothing anymore. And then it really hit me like, Stephen wouldn't care about whether or not I could get him into the New York Times. I was frequently trying to tell Stephen he should pitch the New York Times for things. He didn't give a fuck about that. He was very happy having his own platform that he built, his own supporters in his own place, and he didn't feel the need to go chase down approval from people with power or people with bigger platforms. That's something I'm trying to keep to heart. On a more personal level, I'm sad. On a more personal level, I'm really sad. I'll never get to know what his tabletop RPG characters are going to go do next. He has some I'm quite attached to and a new one that he was about to launch. I'm sad we will never get to watch another movie together and grab a bite outside. Like that was our ritual. I think we saw all the Marvel movies together at the big AMC near Lincoln Center. I'm really sad. So I want to remind everyone, tell the critics and academics whose work you love how much it means to them. Fund their work. Fight for academic workers' unions and public funding for higher education. Stephen was a professor at City University of New York, teaching adult students. It meant so much to him. He was teaching public employees. Watch and read something you love today and talk to a friend about it. That's what we do here on the podcast, and that would make him happy. So one of the other ways I'm trying to memorialize him is not just keeping the website work he'd written up and alive. I'm going back with the help of my assistant, Sophia Langmuir, and we are going to clean up the audio quality of podcast episodes that Stephen and I taped together back in the 20-teens. Back in the 20-teens, our podcast audio quality was not the professional-ish quality you hear today. Let's be real. Every hobbyist podcast had bad audio back then, not just Graphic Policy. And we are, running things through modern filters to really clean up the audio quality. And it's going to take a while for us to get through it. I do have one episode that'll be ready of the Venture Brothers podcast that we cleaned up that'll be ready to hit the RSS feed pretty soon. But it will take some time to go through the rest of them. The thing is, the value of what Stephen had to say on those episodes is as vital as ever. And even if it takes us a while to clean it up, I still think you should go back and listen through them. Here's why. I remember the first time that I got to hear a bootleg of the Velvet Underground. The Velvet Underground are one of my favorite bands. I never got to see them live. I would never get to see them live. There was one live record that was released, the Live at Max's Kansas City, and then that was it. That was all we'd ever heard of them live. And suddenly I found these bootlegs on, Napster when I was in college. It was live Velvet Underground audio I'd never heard before, something I'd never thought I'd hear. I don't know if you've ever heard those bootlegs, but the audio quality is rough. If you don't love listening to the Velvet Underground, you are not going to tolerate listening to them as recorded by a fan using a late 1960s tape recorder placed underneath Lou Reed's guitar amp. That's not the best sound quality in the world, my friends. But damn it, it's the Velvet Underground. Now, I don't have the nerve to compare myself to the band that spawned 10,000 bands. But I think Stephen's wisdom is worth it. So as you go through the archive of our episodes that he co-hosted or guested on, listen with ears that appreciate a lost treasure and that are grateful for the fragments of someone that you can hold on to.
This is why I feel like it is always a good thing when you have an action movie where Nazis are the bad guys, because, you actually do have to remind people of that. It doesn't stay that way on its own.
And with that, thank you for your support. Thank you for the support you've shown his family. I hope you stick with us, and new episodes on X-Men 97 will come. Cleaned up episodes with Stephen will come, and other work from Graphic Policy. So thank you. And if you have other memorials or thoughts you want to share, I'm on Blue Sky at LEVIN at Blue Sky. That's one great way to reach me. And you can also leave a comment through Graphic Policy's website. Solidarity forever with you all. Stephen's memory will certainly be a blessing.